Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to the random review. Today's random review is Illustrious Corpses, directed by Francesco Rosi, starring Lino Ventura, Max von Sydow, Fernando Rey, and Luigi Pistilli. Yes, this is another Francesco Rosi film. This is not my fault. It just so happens that every Francesco Rosi film that I watch is kind of fantastic, so I have to do a video on it. That's not my fault, that is Francesco Rossi's fault. This is a Kino Lorber Blu-ray, which is fairly recent, thanks to Roger Kirby for reminding me that they were actually out. I came so close to buying expensive DVD copies of Illustrious Corpses and Lucky Luciano, which is also coming to Kino Lorber Blu-ray, so don't be surprised if there's a video for that if it's any good. So yeah, these were almost cheaper or just as cheap as the DVDs I was going to order, so very happy with that. The print is excellent, and there's a real pleasant surprise on this Kino Lorber release, because as we know, Kino Lorber, sometimes the extras, there's a lot of extras, sometimes there's nothing. This one doesn't have a lot. It's got a trailer, but the real gem, it's got a commentary by Alex Cox, filmmaker, critic, writer, and certainly for me, one of the most important people in my cinematic journey and education with his work on BBC2's Moviedrome in the late 80s and 90s that I've mentioned here and also on Ronan Nazrin Talks channel. A lot of my favourite films I first saw on Moviedrome with Alex Cox and then later Mark Cousins. So he does a commentary. I've listened to about half an hour of it, and as usual, it's absolutely wonderful. The film itself, it's a 4K restoration and it looks absolutely fabulous. Written and directed by Rossi. He has some writer collaborations, as he does in most of his films. Edited by Marcello Mastroianni's brother, Riggio, who you kind of get to think he must have been the only editor in Italy in the 60s and 70s, because he seems to have edited all these films. Like I say, it also stars Fernando Rey and Max von Sydow. Max von Sydow is dubbed into Italian, if you read his lips. But he gives a wonderful performance, and also Lino Ventura, who's in all those cops and gangster films, Tushy Pal Grisby, and the Deuxième Souffle with Jean-Pierre Melville, just so many. The Medusa Touch with Richard Burton, bizarrely, which is a great wee film. And he just has one of those great faces that's empathetic, but it can also have a bit of rage and a genuine kind of melancholy. And of course Luigi Pistilli, who you might not be familiar with his name, because I couldn't actually remember his name, but you'll be familiar with his face. He's usually in spaghetti westerns as the villain, but he actually plays like a normal person, a journalist in this film. It's quite a surprise that he's not playing an absolute scumbag, because he usually does. There's a lot of familiar Italian faces from spaghetti westerns and crime films that you'll probably notice. As you can see, I'm avoiding the plot because I'm not going to go into plot specifics. I'll just give a brief border kind of shading of what the actual plot is. You're going to have to watch it yourself, and it's another Rossi cracker as far as I'm concerned. So first of all, the title, Illustrious Corpses, or Cadavere Excellenti, which for me must be one of the greatest titles of any film ever, or any book, or any album, or any work of art. Illustrious Corpses is just such a great title. Maybe that's just me. It's based on a novel which was set in an unnamed country, but obviously this is really Italy. Rossi, as we know, and if you don't know, is a fairly political filmmaker, with kind of left leanings, but as I did a video on Hands Over the City, sorry, he pretty much has a go at left, right and middle. So he's not particularly, even though he's a political filmmaker with, left leanings, it's not as if all his films are just all pro-left and not balanced. His films are always balanced. So it's essentially the story of judges who are being killed, and Lino Ventura is the detective who's put on the case of finding out who's killing judges. Now, it's made in 1976. Obviously, I don't know that much about Italian political history, but obviously the Years of Lead, which is like the late 60s really to the late 80s almost. So in the late 60s, mid 70s, there was lots of political assassinations, police chiefs, judges, explosions, bombings, terrorist acts, protests, riots. It's a fairly tumultuous period in Italian history. So this is set during that time. So it's kind of the death of the Mussolini fascism, but obviously the right is still in power in general, but it's the rise of central politics, it's the rise of socialism and popularity in communism, but obviously the right had campaigns to undermine communism, undermine the left, and again, that's kind of the background of what this film is about. Again, I'm obviously not an expert in Italian politics in the late 60s to the mid 70s. Obviously, if you are Italian, you will have a lot more knowledge and a lot more frame of reference to what this film is referencing and what the film is about. But even if you know nothing about Italy in the 60s and 70s, this film is absolutely fantastic. So if you take the kind of political paranoia films of Hollywood in the 70s, which in general everybody thinks are amazing. If you take Pacula's Paranoia trilogy of All the President's Men and The Parallax View and Clute, and if you take Coppola's The Conversation, and there's plenty of other ones from the 70s which are kind of gritty and downbeat, and then if you multiply them by their bleakness ratio of about 10, then you'll get Illustrious Corpses, because Illustrious Corpses, certainly out of the 70s paranoia films that I've seen, is easily the bleakest, and that's saying something, because some of them had those classic 70s endings, if you know what I'm talking about. Illustrious Corpses just goes beyond that. It's so incredibly beautifully bleak, and I like myself some bleakness. The film opens with one of the greatest openings in cinema history, as far as I'm concerned. That might be slightly hyperbolic. So we have this old man who I didn't realise until Alex Cox said in the commentary, but he actually is one of the characters from The Wages of Fear by Clouseau. He's actually one of the truck drivers, but obviously he's a lot older in 1976 because Wages of Fear was 55, maybe. So there's this old man, and he goes into these catacombs to look at some mummies that are in a tomb. And Rossi, I mean, again, I'll get to the kind of locations in this film and the production design in this film, but Rossi really forces the viewer to look at these mummies and kind of, dollies into their eyes that have been sewn shut and their mouths. I mean, there's one that's obviously had his tongue cut out. They are mummified, so they're not in the best of shape. But it's the way Rossi's camera really lingers on them, and we see this old man kind of looking at them and nodding, and there's this beautiful corridor of all these mummies. It's quite a beautiful scene, and then at the end of the scene, the man walks down the corridor, gives them a last longing look at the mummies, as you would, and he goes up some stairs into daylight. It's just such a beautiful opening, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the film. You can see he's got a driver waiting outside for him, then he waves the driver away and he takes a walk to this wall where he admires some flowers, and then he's shot. And that's how the film opens, and that's pretty much as much as I'll go into the plot. So he is the first of the illustrious corpses. So it's a procedural. Max von Sydow is a judge that might be a target, and he's only in maybe 2 or 3 scenes, but he does have a great kind of acting monologue speech with Ventura, which is wonderful. Again, Rossi is so good at looking at different classes and the art and the kind of artifice and the objects and the belongings that these people have. So in Hands Over the City, you can look at the slums and the poor, and then you can look to the politicians' houses, and so there's a lot of that. It is a colour film. The opulence of the middle classes and the bourgeoisie. Again, he's not judging, but his camera just shows you and lingers over the art, because for me, one of the great things about Rossi is his films are about the kind of dirt and politicking and corruption and kind of earthiness of the human condition, but then he's also shows off the art, the architecture, the sculpture, the creativity of the human race, and it's that mix of dirt and art that I think makes Rossi pretty special. And again, along with Elio Petri, Rossi has become easily my kind of favourite Italian directors, along with Leone. Again, I haven't really got to Fellini and Antonioni and Rossellini as much as other people have. But for me, Rossi and Petri are right in my wheelhouse of what they talk about and what their films are about. Again, the production design, the locations are just stunning, and it has that mix of the old world and the new world that I have mentioned in my Petri random reviews for Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, which is always a mouthful, and Property is No Longer a Theft, and The 10th Victim, where Petri just uses these locations within Rome and Italy in general. So you have the sculpture, you have the architecture, but you also have these kind of newer buildings that give it a kind of otherworldly, kind of timeless, almost science fiction feel. Certainly in Petrie's like 10th Victim. But again, Illustrious Corpses has that mix. So there'll be like shots of riots and protests, but then there'll just be these sparse areas where Ventura is standing almost alone in this sparse space, strangely enough. Again, the production design is wonderful. There's a scene where Ventura goes to find somebody's records, and it's just a room full of essentially shelves or drawers, and there's just huge letters of the alphabet all around the room. The police station is very interesting. There's a nice grey corridor with subdued lighting, and Ventura will like walk into a door, not walk into a door, he'll open a door and walk into a room, and there'll just be like 20 people sitting around the room, all getting berated and shouted at. Again, the funeral of the first character, the first judge, you know, it's about, oh, the initial thought is the mafia has killed him, and then there's the youth who are saying, you know, you're the mafia and you're the ones. So again, you just have this feeling of unrest, you have this feeling that society is on the verge of exploding, which literally at the time that's what was happening. But again, even though it's set in that kind of era in Italy, or it was made in that kind of period in Italy, Rossi's films are still relevant, because again, as we sadly learn, we never actually learn from those mistakes. So the film looks great, it's brilliant performances, it's in my wonderful bleak wheelhouse. 121 minutes, you could argue it's perhaps 5 or 10 minutes too long, but it's such a kind of fascinating world. You know, when Ventura goes to talk to like party leaders, or talks to Fernando Rey's character, you know, the opulence of their environments is just kind of hypnotic and kind of really fascinating to get into. Ventura, even though he doesn't talk a lot, you can kind of see what's going through his brain, and he's a compelling character. And then of course you get like masterly turns by Max von Sydow. It's just another wonderful Rossi film. Not that I'm biased, but I'm certainly turning into being biased. When I've got another couple of Rossis to watch, so be warned, you know, there might be more videos coming, but then I might actually just do a kind of in the frame video on Rossi once I've tracked down some more, just to kind of get an overview of his entire career. But so far I think I've seen maybe about 6 or 7, maybe, and for me at least none of them are below a 4, and I think probably 3 of them are 5-star films. This one is just absolutely fantastic. I was trying to temper my expectations, but it lived up to what I thought it might be. Certainly with a title called Illustrious Corpses. I do love that title. So thanks very much for watching. I apologise because it's another Italian film, it's another Rossi film. Again, it's not my fault, blame him for making such great films. So please let me know if you have seen Illustrious Corpses. Yes, I'm going to mention the title again. And again, let me know what your favourite Rossi film is. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews, which hopefully not all of them will be Rossi films. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.